I mean, if we call a spade, it's really an invisible tax, which is the theft of the value of savings. And I think if people understand that, they would really appreciate the poison that is caused by monetary debasement.
What role does monetary policy play in driving inflation? Well, here to discuss is Stuart Hayward. Stuart, you've been on the show a few times now, and you've written a piece in the Business Day, which we'll link to below, talking about the role that central banks play in determining monetary policy and the impact that that has on inflation. Could you explain to our viewers why is monetary policy so important in this discussion around the economy?
Good morning, David. Thank you. If I could just start off and explain what I mean by monetary policy, which is basically the South African Reserve Bank's approach to controlling the quantity of rands in circulation. What I want to express is the difficulties that are faced by the middle class and the poor whenever more rands are printed. And when we're talking about fiat monetary policy, we're talking about printing money that is not backed by a scarce asset. So what that means is that the Reserve Bank has a mandate to control the value of the currency, but it allows them to print literally as many rands as they see fit. And the problem with this, David, of course, is that in terms of simple supply and demand, every time a rand is printed by the South African Reserve Bank, the rand in your pockets devalues. We call this monetary debasement. And this has catastrophic consequences on savings, and in particular on the poor and the middle class, which exacerbates inequality. The reason it exacerbates inequality is that it is the poor and the middle class that will keep the majority of whatever they can save or invest. They will not hold assets. And the problem is that once the inflation kicks in from the debasement, is that the reserve banks increase the repurchase rate or the repo rate, which dictates the prime lending rates, which makes credit more expensive, which means that the poor and middle class have more difficulty in finding sanctuary in assets. Like the poor, like the rich are in contradistinction, most of their wealth is in assets, which means that they are less affected by inflation. In fact, one could argue that they benefit from inflation.
Okay, so this concept of rand debasement essentially robs citizens of the money in their pocket. It's almost like an indirect tax on their income. But there are obviously a number of drivers of inflation. There's this war in Ukraine, which is pushing up food and fertilizer prices. There's the supply chain crunch due to the lockdowns in China. But monetary policy is really a key area in which inflation can also be determined, as you've outlined. But now, if you look at the South African Reserve Bank's conduct compared to other central banks, the US Federal Reserve, the ECB in Europe, their stimulus has been rather modest by comparison. I mean, do you think that it's fair to criticize the SARB here for its conduct?
David, that is true that the SARB has been a lot more restrained than Western economies, developed economies. But I think the focus point, which I wish to raise, is that it doesn't matter if the SARB has printed less money than everyone else in comparison. The problem is that the SARB is still printing money that is not backed by an asset, which without question devalues the value of the rand. Now, this has a major impact on, for example, the purchase of crude oil imports. And quite obviously, the war in Ukraine and supply chain factors are also an external factor that push up prices of crude. But what the Reserve Bank can't get away from is that every time it devalues the rand, dollar imports necessarily become more expensive. So the question that I raise is, if South Africa doesn't have the money to spend, then it shouldn't be printing money that is non-asset backed, because effectively, like you say, it is a tax. It is really, I mean, if we call a spade, it's really an invisible tax, which is the theft of the value of savings. And I think if people understand that, they would really appreciate the poison that is caused by monetary debasement.
Yes, indeed, because one of the primary purposes of money is not just as a medium of exchange, but also as a store of value for the long term, that your labor or the value that you create can be captured by money and saved for a later date to be deployed in a manner that you see fit. But debasing the value of that currency actually undermines that, that store of value proposition. All right, so what are some of the alternatives out there? Because a large part of your article, which we'll link to below, focused on some of the benefits of Bitcoin. And, you know, I think that there are upsides and downsides to Bitcoin, but this idea of longer term store of value, I think, is one of the primary benefits of Bitcoin. Could you explain what you argued in the piece?
So, David, what I did was I just wanted to share, via writing that article with the Business Day readership, my experience of learning more about fiat currency monetary policy via a understanding of Bitcoin's monetary policy. Now, what I'm trying to explain in the article is that money should be a store of value. It should be scarce. That is sound money. Because if money loses its value every year, we have a problem in the sense that people that cannot afford to buy assets that would necessarily be saving their money are losing value every year, and they are pushed up the risk curve, which means that they have no choice but to try and find a way to reduce the loss of value by going into equities. And this is obviously not a great outcome, because that presents a tremendous risk. And so I use Bitcoin as an example of money which is scarce and sound. Now, whether Bitcoin will become adopted globally and whether it is what it promises to be is not the focus point of what I'm saying. It's really just a question of comparing the monetary policy of the SARB and global fiat monetary policy versus Bitcoin, and using Bitcoin as a tutor to really understand what sound money is. Because I think there's, without question, we've been raised with a fiat system. So economists have been taught a fiat system in terms of Keynesian economics. And so what I underline in the article is to say, well, look, perhaps one should look at this differently, in the sense that money should be scarce, and one must be cognizant of the ravages of inflation, and Bitcoin could potentially be a solution. Now, whether it can roll out or whether it can scale is another question altogether.
And how might governments respond to this threat posed by Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies to their monopoly over the currency, over fiat currency?
David, I mean, I think without question, there will be pushback. There is pushback from governments. And we've seen pushback from governments, particularly in countries like Nigeria, where Bitcoin has been banned. But what we've seen, interestingly, in countries like Nigeria is that peer-to-peer transactions of Bitcoin have spiked. So it's one of these it's such an interesting facet of Bitcoin, is that it's very hard to stop. So, and I think that's really where the game theory comes in. In other words, some countries will ban it, some countries will embrace it. And I think that eventually it will just become too problematic, inefficient, and expensive not to embrace Bitcoin.
Stuart Hayward, thank you very much. We'll put a link to your article in the pinned comment. We're also interested to hear from you, our audience. What role do you think the South African Reserve Bank should be playing in terms of controlling inflation? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to check out this video over here. Please do remember to like this video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We release a new video every weekday morning at 6 a.m. My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Until next time, take care.